The letter trembled in Natalie Thompson's hands as the stagecoach rattled over another rut in the dusty Colorado road, jostling her against the worn leather seat while doubt gnawed at her insides like a persistent hunger. She had read Thomas Everett's carefully worded correspondence at least a dozen times during her journey from Philadelphia, searching between the lines for warmth that simply was not there. He needed a wife to help run his ranch outside Marysvale. She needed escape from her sister's increasingly hostile household after their father's death had left Natalie with nowhere else to turn. A business arrangement, nothing more, nothing less. That was what they had agreed upon through their exchange of letters over the past 3 months. The September sun blazed overhead as the stagecoach pulled into Marysvale proper, such as it was. The small mining town in Piute County consisted of little more than a main street with a handful of buildings. A general store, a saloon, a church barely larger than a garden shed, and a few other establishments whose purposes Natalie could not immediately determine through the dust coating the windows. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the late summer heat. It was 1876, and this corner of Utah territory felt like the edge of civilization itself. Natalie smoothed her traveling dress, a modest brown affair that had seen better days, and checked that her dark hair remained properly pinned beneath her bonnet. At 23, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood back in Philadelphia, where her sharp tongue and sharper mind had discouraged potential suitors who preferred simpering compliance to actual conversation. Her father, a schoolteacher, had educated her as thoroughly as any son, a gift that became a curse in drawing rooms where marriageable young women were expected to ornament sofas rather than offer opinions. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before the general store, and the driver called out their arrival. Natalie gathered her carpetbag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned in the world. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk, her legs unsteady after days of travel. A man detached himself from the shadow of the store's overhang. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of dark honey beneath his worn hat. He moved with the careful economy of someone accustomed to hard physical labor, and his blue eyes assessed her with an expression Natalie could not quite read. Thomas Everett, almost certainly, though he looked younger than she had imagined. Perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and features that might have been handsome if they were not set in such serious lines. "Miss Thompson." His voice was deep, with a slight roughness that suggested a man more comfortable with horses than people. "Yes, Mr. Everett, I presume." He nodded once, reached for her trunk without ceremony, and hefted it as though it weighed nothing. "Welcome to Marysvale. The wagon is just there." He gestured with his chin toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 patient horses. "We should head out before it gets much later." It is about an hour to the ranch. No greeting beyond the perfunctory. No smile. Certainly no warmth. Natalie swallowed her disappointment. It was foolish anyway to have hoped for more, and followed him to the wagon. He loaded her trunk into the back, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hands were strong and calloused as they gripped her waist, lifting her easily, and Natalie felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the contact. He climbed up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked to the horses. They moved forward at a steady walk, leaving Marysvale behind. The silence stretched between them like the vast landscape opening before the wagon. Natalie studied the terrain, mountains giving way to high desert, scrub brush and hardy grasses dotting the earth. It was beautiful in its own stark way, so different from the green rolling hills of Pennsylvania. The ranch, Thomas said finally, his eyes on the road, is about 800 acres. I run cattle, about 200 head right now. I have a foreman, Miguel Santos, and 3 hands who help with the work. There is a main house, a bunkhouse for the men, barn, and other outbuildings. I see. Natalie kept her voice neutral. And what would my responsibilities entail? Cooking, cleaning, mending, the usual household tasks. He paused, and she saw his jaw tighten. I will be honest with you, Miss Thompson. I am not looking for companionship or romance. My first wife died 2 years ago. I need help managing the household so I can focus on the ranch. That is all. The bluntness stung, though Natalie tried not to show it. I understand. That was the arrangement we discussed in our letters. Good. Another long pause. We can be married tomorrow if you are agreeable. The circuit preacher is due through town. It will make things proper. Tomorrow seems quite soon. No point in waiting. His tone was flat, businesslike. You came all this way for this purpose. Might as well see it done. Natalie folded her hands in her lap, her throat tight. What had she expected? He had been clear in his letters. This was a transaction, nothing more. She was trading her labor for security, a roof over her head, a place in the world. Romance was for young girls who could afford such dreams, not for women like her who had to be practical. The ranch appeared gradually as they crested a low rise. The house was larger than Natalie had anticipated, a solid 2-story structure built from local timber and stone. It was well maintained, with a covered porch wrapping around the front and one side. The barn and other outbuildings looked equally sturdy. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Even if he could not spare warmth for a stranger, he intended to marry. Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop before the house. A lean man with dark hair and weathered brown skin emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He approached with a curious but friendly expression. Miguel, Thomas said, jumping down from the wagon, this is Miss Thompson. We will be married tomorrow. Miguel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he recovered quickly, removing his hat. Welcome, Miss Thompson. It is good to have a woman here again. The place has been too quiet. Thank you, Natalie said, warming to his genuine smile. At least someone seemed pleased by her arrival. Thomas lifted her trunk from the wagon bed and carried it toward the house. I will show you to your room. Miguel, can you see to the horses? Of course. Natalie followed Thomas through the front door into a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable if worn furniture arranged before it. The kitchen area was spacious, with a good stove and ample counter space. Everything was clean but impersonal, as though no one truly lived here, only existed. Thomas led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. A hallway ran the length of the house, with several doors opening off it. He stopped before one and pushed it open, carrying her trunk inside and setting it at the foot of a narrow bed. This was, he paused, and for the first time she heard emotion in his voice. This was going to be a nursery, but you can use it now. The room was small but pleasant, with a window overlooking the front of the property. The walls were bare, and the furniture consisted only of the bed, a small dresser, and a chair. Natalie noticed the careful construction, the smooth finish on the woodwork. Someone had put love into preparing this space. Thank you. It is very nice. Thomas stood awkwardly in the doorway, his hat in his hands. My room is at the other end of the hall. I want you to know I will not, that is, I expect nothing from you beyond what we agreed. You will have your privacy. Heat crept up Natalie's neck despite herself. I appreciate your candor, he nodded, still not meeting her eyes directly. I will leave you to settle in. Supper is usually around 6. I am not much of a cook, mostly beans and whatever else does not require much skill. That is one reason I need help. I am a competent cook. My father always said I had a gift for it. Something flickered across his face there and gone too quickly to identify. Good, that is good. He turned to leave, then paused. I know this is not what most women dream of. I am sorry for that. But I will provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. You have my word. Before Natalie could respond, he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. She sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted from travel and emotion both. What had she done? She had crossed half a continent to marry a stranger who wanted nothing from her but cooking and cleaning, who could barely look at her, who was still so clearly haunted by the wife he had lost that he could not make room for anything else. But what choice did she have? Her sister, Sarah, had made it abundantly clear that Natalie was no longer welcome in her home, not with Sarah's new husband viewing Natalie's presence as an imposition. Natalie had no means to support herself, and Philadelphia offered few respectable options for unmarried women without family connections. At least here she would have purpose, even if she would never have love. She rose and unpacked her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the dresser. A Degria type of her father joined them, his kind face frozen in time. "What would you think of this, Papa?" she whispered to the image. "Your educated daughter becoming a frontier housewife for a man who does not want her." But she knew what he would say. He had always been practical, always emphasized survival and adaptation. Do what you must, Natalie, but do it well. Find what joy you can. As the afternoon waned, Natalie washed her face in the basin on the dresser and changed into a fresh dress. If she was to begin her new life, she might as well start now. She made her way downstairs and found Thomas in the kitchen area, frowning at a pot on the stove. "May I?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "You do not need to start tonight. You have been traveling for days." "I am not particularly tired, and I might as well familiarize myself with the kitchen." She moved past him to examine the pot, which contained what appeared to be beans and salt pork, edible but uninspired. "What supplies do you have?" "There is a root cellar access through that door," he pointed. "Some preserved items in the pantry, flour, cornmeal, the usual staples. I go into town for supplies once a month or so." Natalie explored the pantry and cellar, finding them adequately stocked if poorly organized. She had worked with less. Within an hour, she had transformed the simple beans into something more appetizing with the addition of onions, a bit of molasses she found in the back of the pantry, and some dried herbs. She made cornbread to accompany it and brewed fresh coffee. Thomas had disappeared during her preparations, but he returned as she was setting the table, drawn perhaps by the aromas. He had washed and changed his shirt. His hair was damp, as though he had dunked his head in the water trough. "Smells good," he said quietly. "It is nothing fancy, but better than beans alone." He called for Miguel and the other hands, who introduced themselves as Jack, Peter, and a young man named Danny who could not have been more than 19. They all regarded Natalie with curiosity but good manners, removing their hats and washing before sitting at the large table. The meal was more pleasant than Natalie had anticipated. The men were hungry and appreciative, and Miguel kept conversation flowing with stories about the ranch and the surrounding area. Thomas remained quiet, but she noticed him watching her occasionally, his expression thoughtful. After supper, the hands returned to the bunkhouse and Miguel excused himself as well. Natalie began clearing the table, but Thomas stopped her. "I can help with that." "It is my responsibility now. You cooked. I can at least help clean up." He gathered plates without waiting for her response and brought them to the counter where she had placed a basin for washing. They worked in silence for a few minutes, Natalie washing and Thomas drying. It was oddly domestic, intimate in a way their earlier interactions had not been. His hands were steady as he dried each plate and put it away, obviously familiar with the task. "Your wife," Natalie said carefully. "Did she live here long?" Thomas's hands stilled for a moment. 3 years. We married young, built this place together. She was from Pennsylvania too, actually. We met when I went back east to buy breeding stock." His voice was carefully neutral, but Natalie heard the pain beneath it. "I am sorry for your loss. It was a fever. Came on quick. By the time I could get the doctor out from the larger town, it was too late." He placed the last plate in the cupboard with excessive care. "She was 24, too young." "Yes," Natalie agreed softly, "much too young." He turned to face her then, really looking at her for the first time. His eyes were a striking blue, she noticed, lighter than she had first thought, like a summer sky. "I want you to know it is nothing personal. My coldness. You seem like a fine woman. I just cannot, I am not ready to, I may never be ready for more than the arrangement we discussed." Natalie met his gaze steadily. "I understand. I harbor no expectations beyond what we agreed upon, Mr. Everett. I need security and a place in the world. You need household help. We each have something the other requires. That is sufficient." Something that might have been relief or possibly disappointment, she could not tell which, crossed his features. "Call me Thomas. If we are to be married, we should at least use given names." "Then you must call me Natalie." "Natalie," he repeated, as though testing how it felt in his mouth. "It suits you." Before she could ask what he meant, he bid her good night and retreated to his room. Natalie finished tidying the kitchen, banked the fire, and climbed the stairs to her own small chamber. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, more stars than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, where city lights obscured them. The vastness of the landscape, the isolation of the ranch, the strangeness of her situation all pressed down on her. Tomorrow she would marry a man she had known for less than a day. A man who had been clear he wanted nothing from her but labor, who still loved his dead wife too much to consider loving anyone else. Natalie had thought herself prepared for a loveless marriage of convenience, but actually facing it felt different than she had anticipated. There was something about Thomas, despite his coldness, that made her wish for more. The way he moved, strong and capable. The grief in his eyes that spoke of a capacity for deep feeling, even if it was locked away. The care he had taken building that nursery, the gentleness with which he had helped her from the wagon. She shook her head at her own foolishness. This was exactly what she had signed up for, what she had agreed to. She had no right to want more, to hope for affection from a man who had made his limitations abundantly clear. Sleep came fitfully that first night in her new home, dreams tangled with anxiety about the morning to come. Dawn broke clear and cool, the September air carrying a hint of the winter to come. Natalie rose, dressed carefully in her best gown, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair into an elaborate arrangement that had been fashionable in Philadelphia a year ago. She studied herself in the small mirror above the dresser. She would never be a great beauty, but she was not unpleasant to look at. Her features were regular, her figure acceptable if a bit too slender for current tastes. Would Thomas find her at all attractive? Did it matter if he did? She found him already in the kitchen, dressed in what were obviously his best clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with a string tie. He had shaved, and his hair was neatly combed. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes widened slightly. "You look very nice," he said, the words sounding almost surprised. "Thank you. As do you." He poured her a cup of coffee without asking, remembering from the night before that she took it black. The small gesture of consideration warmed her more than it should have. "I thought we could ride into town after breakfast," he said. "The preacher usually holds services at 10 on Sundays. He can marry us after. That sounds fine." Breakfast was awkward, both of them picking at the food Natalie had prepared, too anxious to eat much. Finally, Thomas pushed back from the table and stood. "We should go." The ride into Marysvale seemed shorter than it had the day before. Thomas kept the horses at a steady pace, his hands sure on the reins. Natalie watched the landscape roll past, trying to memorize details of what would now be her home territory. The mountains in the distance, the particular way the light hit the scrub brush, the cry of a hawk circling overhead. "Are you afraid?" Thomas asked suddenly. The question surprised her. "Of marrying you? A little, I suppose. It is a significant step. You can still change your mind. I would give you money for the stage back east if you wanted to go." Natalie turned to look at him. His profile was set stoic, but she thought she detected uncertainty in the tightness around his eyes. "Do you want me to go?" "No," he said quietly, "but I want you to have the choice." "I am staying. I gave my word, and beyond that I have nowhere else to go. My sister made it clear I was no longer welcome." "That seems harsh." Her new husband did not appreciate another mouth to feed, particularly one attached to a woman who had opinions. Natalie tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and failed. Thomas glanced at her. "You can have all the opinions you want here. I may not always agree with them, but I would never punish you for speaking your mind." It was a small thing, but it meant more to Natalie than he probably realized. "Thank you." Marysvale was more active on a Sunday morning, with folks gathering for church services. Thomas helped Natalie down from the wagon and led her to the small building that served as the church. Inside, rough-hewn benches faced a simple altar. A man in a dark suit stood at the front, greeting parishioners as they entered. He was perhaps 50, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years spent traveling harsh terrain to serve scattered congregations. "Thomas," the preacher said warmly, "good to see you. It has been a while." "Reverend Morrison, this is Miss Natalie Thompson. We are hoping you might marry us after services." The Reverend's eyebrows rose, but his smile remained welcoming. "Miss Thompson, a pleasure. I would be honored to perform the ceremony." He studied them both for a moment. "Shall we speak briefly in private first?" He led them to a small room at the back of the church. "Please sit." When they had settled on the available chairs, he continued. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered lightly. Thomas, you have suffered a terrible loss. Are you certain you are ready for this step?" "I need help with the ranch, Reverend. Miss Thompson needs a home. We understand what we are doing." "And you, Miss Thompson, you have come a long way. Are you entering this marriage of your own free will?" "I am," Natalie confirmed. "Thomas has been honest about his expectations. I harbor no illusions about the nature of this union." Reverend Morrison looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "I will marry you, but I would offer you both some counsel. A marriage that begins as mere convenience can become something more if you let it. Do not close your hearts to that possibility. Life is hard enough without refusing what comfort and joy we might find." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Natalie murmured her agreement, though she doubted the Reverend's words would change anything. Thomas had made his position clear. The service itself was simple but well attended. Natalie was conscious of curious looks from the congregation, townspeople assessing the stranger who had come to marry one of their own. After the final hymn, Reverend Morrison called Thomas and Natalie forward. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Natalie like a dream. She heard herself making vows, promising to love and honor, for better or worse, until death parted them. Thomas's voice was steady as he repeated his own vows, but his hand trembled slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. She wondered where he had gotten it, whether it had belonged to his first wife, but then decided she would rather not know. "I now pronounce you man and wife. Thomas, you may kiss your bride." Thomas hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly, chastely, to Natalie's. It was over almost before it began, but Natalie felt the warmth of it spread through her chest. Their first kiss, cold and perfunctory as it was, as husband and wife. Congregants came forward to offer congratulations, though Natalie could see speculation in many eyes. A woman named Martha Preston was particularly warm, inviting them both to supper the following week. "It will be good for you to know your neighbors," she said kindly to Natalie. "We women are scarce out here. We must support each other." "Thank you," Natalie said, genuinely grateful. "I would like that very much." The ride back to the ranch was quiet again, but the silence felt different somehow, more settled. Natalie looked down at the ring on her finger, still strange and new. She was married. Natalie Everett now, no longer Natalie Thompson. Bound to a man who did not love her, who might never love her, but who had promised to provide for and protect her. It would have to be enough. When they arrived home, Miguel and the other hands had prepared something of a celebration, a simple meal laid out on a table in the yard, with wildflowers in a jar as decoration. Natalie was touched by the gesture. "Miguel, you did not have to do this," Thomas said, but his voice was warm. "A wedding should be celebrated," Miguel replied, "even if it is just us." They ate and talked as the afternoon sun slanted long across the yard. The hands were respectful but friendly, asking Natalie about her journey and her impressions of Utah territory. She found herself relaxing, even laughing at some of Danny's stories about his misadventures learning ranch work. As evening approached and the hands drifted back to their own quarters, Natalie and Thomas were left alone. He helped her clear the remains of the meal, another quiet domestic moment that felt almost companionable. "Thank you," Natalie said as they finished, "for today, for making it as pleasant as possible." "You are my wife now," Thomas said, meeting her eyes. "That means something to me, even if it is not a traditional marriage. I meant what I said. I will take care of you." "I know you will." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just nodded and headed for the door. "I need to check on the stock before dark." "Make yourself at home." Natalie watched him go, this man who was now her husband, and wondered if he would ever truly let her into his life beyond the practical arrangements they had made. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Natalie rose early to prepare breakfast for Thomas and the hands. After they headed out to work the ranch, she tackled the household tasks that had been neglected during Thomas's time alone. She cleaned thoroughly, organized the pantry and cellar, mended clothes and linens. She explored the property near the house, finding a neglected kitchen garden that she began to restore. Thomas was polite but distant. He thanked her for meals, complimented her cooking and the improvements she made to the household, but never lingered in conversation. He rose before dawn and often did not return until after dark, throwing himself into ranch work with single-minded intensity. At night, he retreated to his room at the far end of the hall, and Natalie retreated to hers. Yet she began to notice small things. The way he always made sure there was fresh water in the pitcher in her room. How he repaired the garden fence without her asking. The time she found him examining one of her father's books that she had left in the main room, handling it with careful reverence before setting it back precisely where she had placed it. Miguel became something of a friend, often stopping by the kitchen for coffee and conversation in the afternoons. He had worked for Thomas since the beginning, had known his first wife. "Catherine," he said one day when Natalie asked. Her name was Catherine. She was kind, always laughing. Thomas was different then, lighter. When she died, it was like something broke in him. He must have loved her very much. He did. But I think maybe he punishes himself now, refuses to be happy because she cannot be. Miguel studied Natalie over his coffee cup. "You are good for this place for him, even if he is too stubborn to see it yet. I am just the housekeeper he needed. You are more than that. I see how he watches you when you are not looking." Natalie's heart skipped. "Watches me, like he is trying to figure something out. Like he is surprised by something." Miguel smiled. "Give him time. He is a good man under all that grief." She wanted to believe Miguel, but weeks passed with little change. They attended services together each Sunday, presenting a united front to the community. They ate meals together, worked in the same space, lived in the same house, but remained fundamentally separate. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first real frost. Natalie had been at the ranch for a month, married for nearly as long. She had settled into her role, had become comfortable with the routines and rhythms of ranch life. But the distance between her and Thomas remained an ache she could not ignore. One evening, she was preparing supper when Thomas came in earlier than usual. His face was troubled and he moved with unusual tension. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Storm coming. Big one from the feel of it. We spent the day getting the stock to shelter and securing everything we could." He moved to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "It is going to be bad." Even as he spoke, Natalie could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows. "What should I do?" "Make sure all the windows are latched tight. I am going to check on the stock one more time and make sure the hands are settled in the bunkhouse." He disappeared back into the gathering storm. Natalie secured the windows as instructed, her heart beating faster as the wind howled louder. She had never experienced a true mountain storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. By the time Thomas returned, nearly an hour later, the storm had arrived in full fury. Rain lashed the house and lightning illuminated the world in brief, stark flashes. Thomas was soaked through, water streaming from his hat and clothes. "Lord, you are drenched," Natalie said, already moving to get towels. "You need to get out of those wet things before you catch your death." "I am fine," he said, but she could see him shivering. "You are not fine. Go change. I will make hot coffee." For once, he did not argue, just climbed the stairs to his room while Natalie put coffee on and ladled stew into a bowl. He returned in dry clothes, his hair still damp, rubbing his arms against the chill. "Sit by the fire," she commanded, and again he obeyed. She brought him the coffee and stew, then took the chair across from him. The storm raged outside, shaking the house. A particularly violent crash of thunder made Natalie jump, and she saw Thomas watching her. "Frightened?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "I have never experienced a storm quite like this. They can be fierce up here in the mountains, but the house is solid. We will be fine." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm's fury. The firelight flickered across Thomas's features, and Natalie found herself studying him. He had strong bones, a face that could be stern but also held capacity for gentleness. She had seen that gentleness with the animals, the way he handled a skittish horse or a newborn calf. "Why did you really answer my advertisement?" he asked suddenly, his eyes on the fire rather than her. The question surprised her. "I told you, I needed a home." "But you are educated, clearly intelligent. You could have found work as a teacher or a governess. Perhaps in a city, but those positions are competitive and require connections I do not have, and most schools prefer male teachers." She paused, considering how much to reveal. "My sister made it clear I was a burden. I had no money of my own. This seemed like the best option available to me. You deserve better than a business arrangement with a man who cannot give you what a husband should. Natalie's breath caught. And what should a husband give? Affection. Partnership. A real marriage, not this half-life we are living. You were very clear about the terms when I agreed to come here. I know. His voice was rough. I know I was. But lately I have been thinking that maybe I was not being fair to you. You keep up your end of our arrangement admirably. You have made this house a home again. The men are happier, the household runs smoothly, and I find myself looking forward to coming home in a way I have not in years. Natalie's heart was hammering now. Thomas, what are you saying? He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. I am saying that I think I have been lying to myself, telling myself I just needed a housekeeper when the truth is, he stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. When the truth is that I notice everything about you. The way you hum when you are cooking, how you always tuck the same strand of hair behind your ear when you are concentrating, the sound of your laugh when Miguel tells one of his stories. You are not just my housekeeper, Natalie. You have not been for a while now. I do not understand. But she thought maybe she did, hoped she did. He stood abruptly, crossing to where she sat and dropped to his knees beside her chair. I am afraid, he said quietly. Afraid to care again, to risk losing someone again. But I think I am starting to care anyway, and I do not know what to do about it. Natalie reached out tentatively and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. You do not have to do anything, she whispered. We can just see what happens. No pressure, no expectations beyond what we already have. I would like that. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. I would like that very much. The storm raged on outside, but inside something had shifted, some wall had begun to crack. They talked long into the night, sharing stories about their lives, their fears, their hopes. Thomas told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west to make his fortune, about building the ranch from nothing. Natalie told him about her father, about her love of learning, about feeling like she never quite fit in the world she was born into. As the fire burned low and exhaustion finally claimed them, Thomas walked her to her door. He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. Good night, Natalie. Good night, Thomas. She lay awake long after, her heart too full for sleep. Something had changed between them tonight, something fragile and new but real. She did not know where it would lead, but for the first time since arriving in Utah territory, she felt a flutter of hope. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean by the storm. Natalie found Thomas already in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into a smile that transformed his features, made him look years younger. Morning, he said. I was trying to surprise you with breakfast, but I think I am out of my depth. Natalie laughed, the sound free and genuine. A noble effort. Here, let me help. They worked together, their movements synchronized in a way they had not been before. Thomas's hand brushed hers as they reached for the same spoon, and instead of pulling away, he let it linger. Small touches, brief glances, tentative smiles. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Over the following weeks, their relationship continued to evolve. Thomas began coming home earlier, finding excuses to spend time in the house. He sat with Natalie in the evenings, reading while she mended or working on ranch accounts at the table while she prepared meals. They talked more, sharing opinions on everything from politics to the best way to make bread. He began teaching her to ride properly, patient with her inexperience, his hands steadying her in the saddle. They explored the ranch together on Sunday afternoons, Thomas showing her his favorite spots, the places where the view stretched for miles, where a creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. One Sunday, he took her to a high meadow where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Natalie had packed, talking and laughing in the warm autumn sun. "I used to come here a lot," Thomas said, lying back to look at the sky. "After Catherine died, it was the only place I could think." Natalie stretched out beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Do you still miss her terribly?" "I will always miss her," he said carefully. "She was part of my life, part of who I became. But lately, I have realized that missing her does not mean I cannot be happy again. She would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone and miserable." "No," Natalie agreed softly. "If she loved you, she would want you to be happy." He turned his head to look at her. "I am happy, or at least I am starting to be, because of you." Before Natalie could respond, he reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They lay like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the ranch in white. Natalie woke to find frost patterns on her window and the world transformed. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Thomas already stoking the fire. "It is beautiful," she said, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered landscape. "It is also going to make the work harder," Thomas said, but he was smiling. He came to stand behind her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "But yes, it is beautiful." She leaned back slightly, and his arms came around her waist, pulling her against his chest. They stood like that, watching the snow fall, and Natalie felt a contentment she had never known before. This was not the wild, passionate romance she had read about in novels. It was quieter, steadier, built on shared daily life and growing trust. But it was real, and it was theirs. That evening, after supper, Thomas asked if she would like to sit by the fire with him. It had become their habit, this quiet time together before bed, but tonight felt different somehow, charged with anticipation. "Natalie," he said once they were settled, "I know our marriage did not start in a conventional way, but I want you to know that I consider you my true wife now in every sense." Her heart raced. "Thomas, let me finish," he said gently. "I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give. I just want you to know that my feelings have changed. You are not just convenient help anymore. You are the woman I choose, the woman I want beside me." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "I choose you too." "I have been choosing you for weeks now, maybe longer." He reached for her, cupping her face in his hands. "May I kiss you? Really kiss you, please," she whispered. This kiss was nothing like the brief peck they had shared at their wedding. Thomas kissed her slowly, thoroughly, his lips warm and sure against hers. Natalie's hands came up to grip his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to spin. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I am falling in love with you. No, I know I am. I have been fighting it, but I cannot anymore." "Then stop fighting," she said, her own voice trembling, "because I have already fallen, completely and irrevocably." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with wanting. "Come to my room," he said. "Be my wife in truth." "Yes," Natalie said simply. "Yes." He took her hand and led her up the stairs, not to the small room at one end of the hall but to his larger chamber at the other. The room was sparsely furnished but comfortable, dominated by a large bed. Thomas lit a lamp, then turned to her. "Are you certain?" he asked. "We can wait if you are not ready." "I am certain," Natalie said. "I want this, I want you." What followed was tender and sweet, Thomas taking his time, making sure of her comfort and pleasure. He was gentle but passionate, and Natalie felt barriers break down between them, both literal and figurative. Afterwards, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Stay," he murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Do not go back to that other room. Stay here with me. Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." He kissed the top of her head. "You are where you belong now, with me." Natalie smiled against his chest. "Then yes, I will stay." The next morning, Miguel noticed immediately when Natalie and Thomas came downstairs together, when Thomas could not seem to stop touching her, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing hers as they passed dishes. He grinned widely. "Finally," he said. "I thought you two would never figure it out." Thomas laughed, actually laughed, and pulled Natalie close. "Turns out we just needed a little time." "And a storm," Natalie added. "And a storm," Thomas agreed, kissing her temple. Life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. They were truly partners now, in work and in life. Thomas began consulting Natalie on ranch decisions, valuing her perspective. She learned more about the cattle business, about the land, about the delicate balance required to make a living in this harsh but beautiful territory. They attended Martha Preston's supper and met more of their neighbors. Natalie began to build friendships with the other women, grateful for their companionship and advice about frontier life. Thomas was more relaxed in social situations now, his arm often around Natalie's waist, his pride in her obvious. Winter settled in earnestly, bringing bitter cold and more snow. But the house was warm, the cupboards well stocked, and Natalie had never been happier. She and Thomas spent long evenings by the fire, talking or reading or simply being together in comfortable silence. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure. Thomas was an attentive lover, as focused on her satisfaction as his own. Natalie bloomed under his attention, becoming more confident, more open. One night in December, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of passion, Thomas said, "I want to give you something." He reached into the drawer of his bedside table and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket engraved with flowers. "Thomas, it is beautiful," Natalie breathed. "Open it," he urged. She did, finding a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken during their last trip to town. She had not even realized he had commissioned it. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that you are not a replacement for Catherine. You are your own person, and what we have is ours alone. But you are my future, Natalie. Everything I hope for, everything I want, it all includes you." Natalie felt tears spill over. "I love you so much." "I love you too, more than I thought I could ever love anyone again." Christmas came, and Natalie threw herself into preparations, determined to make it special. She baked and decorated, enlisted Miguel's help in cutting down a small pine tree that they set up in the main room. On Christmas Eve, she and Thomas attended services at the church in town, then returned home to exchange simple gifts. Thomas gave her books, knowing her love of reading, and a beautiful shawl he had commissioned from one of the town women. Natalie gave him a new hat and a set of leather gloves she had sewn herself, along with his favorite cake. But the best gift was simply being together, sitting by the fire as snow fell softly outside, Thomas's arms around her, both of them at peace. "This has been the best Christmas I have had in years," Thomas murmured against her hair. "Mine too," Natalie agreed. "Every Christmas from now on we will make new memories, good ones. Together," he confirmed. "Always together." The new year, 1877, brought bitter cold but also hope. Natalie began to suspect she might be pregnant in January, though she said nothing to Thomas yet, wanting to be certain. But by February there was no doubt. Her courses had stopped, her breasts were tender, and she felt queasy most mornings. She told Thomas one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. They had not discussed children, though the nursery he had prepared stood as mute testament to his desire for them once. "Thomas," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, immediately attentive to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine, better than fine." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried to the bunkhouse. "A baby," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though she could already see the answer written all over his face. Happy does not begin to cover it. He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I am your papa and I already love you so much." Natalie ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with emotion. "You are going to be a wonderful father, and you are going to be an amazing mother." He stood, cradling her face in his hands. "Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for coming into my life, for giving me a second chance at happiness, for this gift." The months that followed were both wonderful and challenging. Natalie's pregnancy progressed normally, though she was often tired and sick in the early months. Thomas was solicitous to the point of being overbearing, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. They argued about it more than once. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Natalie said exasperatedly when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing household tasks while expecting for all of human history. I just want to keep you safe, both of you." She softened at the worry in his eyes. "I know, but you have to trust me to know my own limits. I will be careful, I promise." He made her promise to rest every afternoon, and she indulged him in this at least. As her belly grew, he became even more attentive, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her when sleep became difficult. He cleared out the nursery, this time with joy rather than grief, and they spent hours planning and preparing. Thomas built a beautiful cradle from local pine, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full as she imagined the baby who would wear them. Martha Preston and the other ranch wives rallied around Natalie, offering advice and support. They held a quilting bee in her honor, creating a beautiful quilt for the baby. Natalie felt truly part of the community now, no longer the strange mail-order bride but a valued neighbor and friend. Summer brought heat that Natalie found oppressive in her pregnant state, but also the promise of new life everywhere. The cattle had calved successfully, and the ranch was thriving. Thomas hired an additional hand to help with the work, wanting to ensure he could be available when Natalie's time came. In late August, nearly a year after Natalie's arrival in Marysville, her labor began. Thomas sent Danny racing to town for the midwife while he stayed with Natalie, holding her hand, his face pale with worry. "It will be all right," Natalie said, trying to reassure him between contractions. "Women do this all the time. I know, but I cannot help worrying. I could not bear to lose you. You will not lose me. I am strong and our baby is strong." The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, arrived and took charge. She sent Thomas downstairs despite his protests, and Natalie labored through the long hours of the night. It was hard, painful work, but she focused on the prize at the end, the baby she and Thomas had created together. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Natalie gave one final push, and the baby entered the world with a lusty cry. "It is a boy, Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squirming, wailing infant on Natalie's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Natalie stared down at her son in wonder, this tiny perfect being with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." "Shall I fetch your husband?" Mrs. Henderson asked with a smile. "Please." Thomas took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the room with wild eyes. But when he saw Natalie, alive and well, holding their son, he stopped, his face crumpling with emotion. "Come meet your son," Natalie said softly. He approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Natalie placed the baby in his arms, and Thomas stared down at the tiny face with an expression of complete awe. "He is perfect," Thomas said, his voice thick. "You are both perfect. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Thomas studied his son's face thoughtfully. "What about Matthew?" he suggested. "It means gift of God, and that is what he is. A gift I never thought I would receive." "Matthew Everett," Natalie said, testing how it sounded. "I like it. Matthew it is." They spent the rest of the day in their own little world, just the 3 of them. Thomas could barely put Matthew down, marveling over tiny fingers and toes, the perfect shell of each ear. When Natalie nursed the baby for the first time, Thomas watched with wonder, this miraculous thing his wife's body could do. Miguel and the Hands came to pay their respects, each taking a careful peek at the new arrival. The house filled with well wishes and small gifts for the baby. Their community had embraced them fully, welcoming this new member with joy. The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting but wonderful. Natalie had heard horror stories about difficult babies, but Matthew was relatively content, sleeping reasonably well and nursing enthusiastically. Thomas was a devoted father, walking the floors with Matthew when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rumbling bass voice. "I never knew I could love like this," he said one night as they watched Matthew sleep in his cradle beside their bed. "Not just him, but you too. It keeps growing, my love for you, deepening every day." "I know what you mean," Natalie said, leaning against him. "Sometimes I look at our life and cannot believe this is real, that I get to have this, have you, have Matthew." "You almost did not," Thomas said soberly. "If you had given up on me in those early weeks, if you had left, I would have lost all of this. But I did not leave, and you did not stay closed off forever. We found our way to each other." "Best thing I ever did, placing that advertisement," Thomas mused. "I thought I was looking for a housekeeper. Turns out I was looking for you." As autumn returned, bringing the first anniversary of Natalie's arrival, they celebrated quietly. Thomas gave her a necklace to match the locket he had given her at Christmas. Natalie gave him a leather-bound journal, knowing he had started recording memories and stories for Matthew. "I want him to know everything," Thomas had said. "About his mother's courage coming all this way, about how we fell in love despite my best efforts to prevent it. About building this ranch and this life. I want him to know his history." They stood on the porch as the sun set, Matthew drowsing in Natalie's arms, Thomas's arm around her waist. "A year ago, I stepped off a stagecoach terrified and uncertain," Natalie said. "I never could have imagined all of this. A year ago, I was half alive, going through the motions," Thomas added. "You brought me back to life, Natalie. You gave me a reason to hope again, to dream again." "We gave each other that," Natalie corrected gently. "It was not just me. You let me in, even when it scared you. You chose to love again, to risk being hurt again. That took tremendous courage." Matthew stirred, making small sounds, and they both looked down at him with besotted smiles. "He is going to be spoiled rotten," Thomas predicted. "Absolutely," Natalie agreed without shame. Life continued its rhythm through that winter and into the next spring. Matthew grew and thrived, beginning to smile and coo, his personality emerging. He was a happy baby, quick to laugh, fascinated by everything around him. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, aided by Natalie's organizational skills and head for figures. They became true partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges. In the summer of 1878, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. Thomas was overjoyed, though worried too, remembering the difficulty of her labor with Matthew. "Every pregnancy is different," Natalie assured him, "and I am stronger now, more prepared for what to expect." "I still reserve the right to worry," Thomas said, but he was smiling. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Natalie had less nausea and more energy. She continued her household tasks with Matthew toddling along beside her, chattering in his developing language. In February of 1879, she gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emily, after Natalie's mother who had died when Natalie was young. The labor was shorter and somewhat easier, and Emily arrived pink and screaming, announcing her presence to the world. Matthew, now a year and a half old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her soft hair and hold her under careful supervision. Thomas was equally smitten, this tiny girl who had already wrapped herself around his heart. "Our family is growing," he said, holding Emily while Matthew leaned against his knee. "I could not ask for anything more, but more came anyway." Another son, William, arrived in 1880, followed by a daughter, Sarah, named after Natalie's sister with whom she had recently reconciled through letters in 1882. Their home rang with children's laughter, with the chaos and joy of family life. Thomas proved to be a patient, loving father, playing with the children, teaching them about the ranch, reading to them in the evenings. Natalie watched him with their children and fell more in love every day. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the area. They expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, adding on rooms and a larger kitchen. Thomas taught Matthew and William to ride and work cattle as they grew old enough. Natalie taught all the children to read and do figures, determined they would have the education she valued so highly. Years passed in a blur of activity and love. The children grew, each developing their own personality and interests. Matthew was serious and thoughtful like his father. Emily was adventurous and bold. William was gentle and kind. Sarah was clever and curious. Through it all, through the daily challenges and joys, through hard times and good, Natalie and Thomas's love continued to deepen. They still stole moments alone when they could, riding out to their special meadow in the summer, sitting by the fire on winter nights after the children were asleep. "Did you ever imagine this?" Natalie asked one such night, comfortably ensconced in Thomas's arms. They were in their early 40s now, silver threading through their hair, lines at the corners of their eyes from years of laughter and sun. "When you placed that advertisement, did you imagine any of this?" "Not even close," Thomas admitted. "I thought I was hiring help. Instead, I found everything I did not know I was missing." "I expected a cold business arrangement," Natalie said. "Instead, I found a love that consumed me completely, still does." Thomas turned her face up to his and kissed her with the same passion he had shown on that night during the storm all those years ago. "And always will," he promised. "For as long as I draw breath, I will love you, Natalie Everett." "And I will love you, Thomas Everett, always and forever." In 1885, Matthew turned 8 and began taking on more responsibility around the ranch. He was a natural leader, and Thomas often said he had the makings of a fine rancher. Emily, at 6, was learning to help her mother in the kitchen and garden, though she still preferred being outdoors with the horses. William, at 5, showed an aptitude for working with animals, gentle and patient in a way that made even the most skittish creatures trust him. Sarah, at 3, was into everything, bright and curious and constantly asking questions that challenged even Natalie's considerable knowledge. Miguel, now in his 50s, had become like family, a beloved uncle to the children who adored him. The ranch hands had changed over the years, but the sense of community remained strong. That spring, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Natalie's sister Sarah wrote that she was widowed and struggling. She asked, tentatively, if there might be room for her to visit, to see Natalie and meet the family she had heard so much about in letters. Natalie showed the letter to Thomas, uncertain of his reaction. "Of course she should come," Thomas said immediately. "She is your sister. This is your home too, Natalie. You can invite whoever you wish." "Even though she was not kind to me when I needed help, people change. You said you have been corresponding for years now, that she has apologized for how she treated you. Everyone deserves a second chance." He smiled. "I of all people should know that. If you had not given me a second chance to be happy, to love again, I would have wasted my life in grief." Sarah arrived in June, a thinner, quieter version of the woman Natalie remembered. But her joy at seeing her sister again was genuine, as was her wonder at the life Natalie had built. "You are happy," Sarah said one afternoon as they watched the children play in the yard. "Truly happy. I can see it in everything you do, every look you exchange with Thomas." "I am," Natalie confirmed, "happier than I ever dreamed possible." "I am sorry," Sarah said quietly, "for how I treated you, for forcing you into a position where you felt you had no choice but to come here." "Do not be sorry," Natalie said, surprising herself with the truth of the words. "If you had not, I would never have met Thomas. I would never have had this life, these children, this love. Everything that happened led me here, and I would not change a single thing." Sarah stayed for the summer, and by the time she left in September, she and Natalie had truly reconciled. She promised to visit again, and Natalie knew she would. Family mattered, even when it was complicated. As the years continued to pass, Natalie and Thomas watched their children grow into capable, kind young people. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Emily surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, and Thomas and Natalie supported her dream, arranging for her to attend a teaching college in Salt Lake City when she was old enough. William became the ranch's veterinarian of sorts, with an almost magical ability to heal sick or injured animals. Sarah, the baby, grew into a bright, inquisitive young woman who read everything she could get her hands on and dreamed of becoming a writer. In 1890, Matthew married a local girl named Rebecca, and they built a house on the ranch property. A year later, they made Thomas and Natalie grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Catherine, after Thomas's first wife. Natalie had suggested the name, and Thomas had wept when he held his tiny granddaughter, touched beyond words by the gesture. "You are not threatened by her memory?" he asked Natalie later. "How could I be threatened by someone who helped shape you into the man I love?" Natalie replied. "She was part of your life, part of your story. Honoring her memory honors you." More grandchildren followed as Emily, William, and eventually Sarah married and started families of their own. The ranch house was always full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of family gathered around the table. Thomas and Natalie grew older together, their hair going from silver to white, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still took walks around the property when weather permitted, still sat together by the fire, still made love with the passion of much younger people. On a warm September evening in 1900, 24 years after Natalie had arrived in Marysville as a frightened mail-order bride, she and Thomas sat on their porch watching the sun set. Their children and grandchildren were scattered about the property, the sound of young voices carrying on the evening air. 24 years, Natalie mused, her hand in Thomas's. It feels like both forever and no time at all. Best 24 years of my life, Thomas said. You know, I still remember the first time I saw you stepping off that stagecoach. You looked so out of place, so uncertain, but also determined. I knew right then you were stronger than you looked. I was terrified, Natalie admitted. You were so cold, so distant. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. I was an idiot, Thomas said bluntly. So busy protecting my heart that I almost missed the greatest gift life could offer. Thank God that storm forced us to really talk to each other. Thank God you let me in, Natalie corrected. That took courage, Thomas, real courage. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, Natalie Everett, more now than I did 24 years ago, more than I did yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. That is beautiful, Natalie said, her eyes misting. Did you just think of that? I have been working on it, he admitted with a smile. I wanted to find the right words to express how my love for you keeps growing, deepening, every single day. I love you too, Thomas. You were supposed to be just a business arrangement, a practical solution to a practical problem. Instead, you became my everything. The love of my life, the father of my children, my partner in all things. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to emerge. The same stars that had watched over them that first night, that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. Inside, they could hear their family gathering for supper, their daughter-in-law calling the children to wash up, their son Matthew's deep voice so like Thomas's own. This was their legacy, this love, this family, this life they had built together from what had started as nothing more than a letter and a desperate hope. No regrets, Thomas asked softly. Not a single one, Natalie said firmly. My only regret is that I wasted those first few weeks being stubborn, but even that led us here, so perhaps it was necessary. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to, Natalie said with certainty. Every moment, every choice led us to this. To each other, to our family, to this beautiful life. Thomas pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, cattle lowing softly in the distance, a night bird calling. They had started with nothing but a business arrangement and a handful of awkward letters. But they had built something extraordinary, a love that had not only endured but flourished, growing stronger with each passing year. A love that had created a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Come on, Thomas said eventually, standing and pulling Natalie to her feet. Our family is waiting. Let us go have supper with our children and grandchildren and count our many blessings. All of which start and end with you, Natalie said, rising on her toes to kiss him. And you, Thomas murmured against her lips. Always you. Hand in hand, they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love that filled it. A mail-order bride and the rancher who had thought he wanted only a housekeeper, who had instead found the romance that consumed them both, had discovered that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never knew you needed. Their love story had begun with practical necessity and reluctant hearts, but it had become something extraordinary, a testament to the power of opening oneself to possibility, of choosing hope over fear, of allowing love to grow in whatever form it takes. And it would endure, written in the hearts of their children and grandchildren, in the very foundation of the home they had built together, in every sunrise over the mountains they both loved. This was their happily ever after, earned through patience and courage, through choosing each other every day, through building a life together one moment at a time. And it was more beautiful, more fulfilling than either of them could have imagined that day when Natalie stepped off the stagecoach into her uncertain future and found instead her destiny.